You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast.
I'm Martin Tyler, and you're listening to Harry Symeou.
Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast brought to you by 90 Min. As ever, I'm your host, Harry Symeou, and on this edition, we're going to be discussing what's gone wrong for Arsenal so far this summer. Why is it that it seems like it takes an age for Arsenal to get any transfer deal done? Why is it that Arsenal are going into the Premier League season in just a couple of days' time with a squad that isn't probably any better than the one that we ended last season with? In fact, you could probably argue it's a little bit weaker. Why is that? We're going to try and make sense of what's happened in the window so far that has led us to this point. We're going to try and make sense of how Arsenal can get out of this, how Arsenal can make sure that they are in the best position possible to compete for the Champions League spots next season. And we're also going to talk about how this summer's poor planning could actually end up to lead to Arsenal falling further behind the Premier League's big spenders. So I'm not expecting this to be too much of a positive one, I've got to be honest. And this is a show I've been thinking about doing for the last couple of days. I've been thinking about it overnight. I've been thinking about it sort of as I was eating my lunch a little bit earlier on today, trying to think of the best way to put this across, trying to think of the best way to articulate what it is I want to say. And then, of course, I want to hear from you guys in the comments section as well with your thoughts, your take on all the subjects being discussed. Before we dive into it, though, I want to say a big thank you to Skipster103, who's just signed up to become a member of the channel. Remember, if you want to support me to bring you more Arsenal and football related content, you can do so by clicking on the link in the description. Check out our membership scheme, see which tier appeals to you, and if you wish, you can sign up. That would be very, very much appreciated. If you're not signing up as a member, that's fine as well. But if you could please just hit the like button on the video and make sure you subscribe to the channel as we approach 15K here on YouTube. That would be much appreciated too. Joe, who's left us a super chat, says, saw this coming, but we got told to be patient. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people saying that, a lot of people feeling that right now, given the situation at Arsenal Football Club at the moment. Look, let's start off by assessing where we are, okay? Because it isn't as doom and gloom as some would have you believe. There are some things from which you can take some encouragement from going into the new season. And I guess the main thing that you can take encouragement from is the fact that Arsenal were significantly stronger in the second half of last season. I think in the midst of all this kind of transfer talk and discussion around players we should be bringing in and players that we should be moving out, that's maybe been overlooked, maybe been forgotten. The fact that Arsenal, once Emile Smith-Rowe and Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli and all those guys were given more opportunities to play and Arsenal's system and shape changed, things did look a lot better. There were still individual errors. There were still moments of, you know, lapses in concentration and all that jazz that we've seen for so long, you know, in the second half of the season as well. But Arsenal were significantly better in the second half of last season than the first half of that campaign. So from that, you can take some encouragement. You can say, well, if Arsenal can continue that kind of form into the new season, if Arsenal can be the way they were in the second half of last season for 3/4 of the season coming up, or 2/3 of it, then Arsenal stand a good chance of finishing in the top four, of being at least there or thereabouts. Remember, Arsenal, despite all their issues last season, only finished 6 points off of the top four. So there are some positives to take, but there are a lot of bloody negatives as well going into the new season. And I'm going to focus on that. I wanted to get the positive bit out of the way right off at the start, because I feel like this is going to be a bit of a therapy session for me because of how I'm feeling with regards to Arsenal and their prospects for next season at this moment in time. So I want to start off by talking about the expectations of the supporters, because as Arsenal supporters, we have become accustomed over the years to competing at the highest level. We have become accustomed to challenging for Premier League titles. We've become accustomed to winning cups. We've been accustomed to going far in European competitions. And I know for an Arsenal fan of my generation who grew up during the height of the Arsene Wenger era, it's very, very difficult to accept where we are now. It's very difficult to understand where we are now. But when I think about it rationally, it's a lot deeper than just Arsenal have declined because we're shit, because this person cost us and this manager was awful and this director of football was terrible and this chairman didn't do a good job, etc., etc. It's a lot deeper than that. And there are reasons outside of the Arsenal world that have impacted and contributed to where Arsenal find themselves now that I think is important to remember and it's important to note. First of all, at the height of the Arsene Wenger era, it was Arsenal versus Manchester United. There were two clubs competing for the Premier League at that point. Manchester United had monopolised the situation and Arsene Wenger came along, turned Arsenal's fortunes around as a football club, elevated us up to a whole new level by being very clever in his recruitment, in his scouting, in bringing in players from untapped markets for cut prices that we could then either develop and nurture into really, really big talents, or we could sell on for big money. A prime example of one that we did sell on for huge money that helped shape the club moving forward was Nicola Anelka. Brought him in for £500,000, sold him for 23, 24 million pounds, if my memory serves me right. So Arsenal were brilliant and innovative and different and changed the landscape of the Premier League. But the Premier League has followed suit, and that makes it tougher to maintain those standards. You look at the 2004 Arsenal side, went the season unbeaten, incredible campaign. The height of Arsene Wenger's Arsenal tenure. Quality players, brilliant football on show, week in, week out. And then the emergence of Chelsea happened. Chelsea Football Club, funded by a sugar daddy, a Russian oligarch, who saw the club as a bit of a plaything and come in and started throwing money at the situation. And all of a sudden, Chelsea became one of the big hitters. Chelsea became a part of the conversation, a part of the Premier League title conversation. And fast forward a few more years down the line, and all of a sudden, you've got Manchester City doing the same thing. A club owned by a state coming into the Premier League, buying everybody and anybody in their path. They've got an abundance of attacking midfielders at Manchester City Football Club. They've got players that play around their forward like Kevin De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, Riyad Mahrez, Raheem Sterling. Yet they've still gone out this summer and spent £100 million on Jack Grealish. They might go and spend another £100 million on Harry Kane. And all of a sudden, Arsenal are being left behind. Arsenal cannot compete with that unless you have an owner who is going to put his hands in his pocket the way that Manchester City's state-owned kind of model works, the way that Chelsea and Roman Abramovich do, then it's impossible to compete with that. How do you keep up? You can't. And so I'm not saying that it's acceptable for Arsenal not to be competing at the very top of the English game. But what I am saying is it's a lot harder to do that now than it was in the early 2000s when only Manchester United were the club setting the pace. It was only Arsenal and Manchester United for the title. And in recent years, we've seen Liverpool come on under Jurgen Klopp. And that's not been because Liverpool have had a sugar daddy owner who's thrown mega money at it. It's because they brought in a good coach in Jurgen Klopp who signed wisely, sold wisely, and managed to improve that team up to a certain level. But you saw last season Liverpool drop off. And while I expect Liverpool to be better this season than they were last season, I don't expect them to challenge for the Premier League title. Why? Because when you do it that way and you can't keep refreshing it and you can't keep going out like Manchester City have just done, like Chelsea are about to do, like Manchester United are doing, you're not going to keep up. You're not going to keep up the pace. Football works in cycles, and those cycles, when they're done the right way and not necessarily, or when you achieve a certain level in the right way, I should say, it's not easy to sustain that over a period of time. And you're going to see that with Liverpool now. I genuinely believe that. I don't think Liverpool will challenge for the Premier League next season. I think they'll be in the top 4, but I think that's about it. And then you've seen Tottenham emerge, as a much stronger side. Then you've seen Everton come into the picture when it comes to spending money. Leicester City, another club, fantastically run. But don't make any mistake about it. Leicester City have got plenty of cash. Leicester City have thrown about plenty of cash. Aston Villa are throwing about plenty of cash at the moment. And the Premier League is a much more difficult landscape than it was in the early 2000s. When you've got clubs that you would normally associate with finishing in the bottom half of the table, going and spending 25, 30 million pounds on players, you know that the Premier League has changed, and you know that investment is now a must, whereas it wasn't in those days. Good coaching, good scouting would see you close the gap. And there are some rare examples now in the modern game of clubs who operate in a really effective way and who have a really strong, successful model that has seen them punch above their weight. A prime example of that is Atalanta in Italy, who continuously punch above their weight because their scouting and their recruitment system is so good, and because they have a really good coach in place who's been allowed to do his job. You look at Brentford, another club who have operated in a very smart way. Got no right to be in the Premier League, with all due respect to Brentford, but they are. And they are for the first time because they've embarked on a project. It's taken them a few years to get there, but they've done it because they've done it in a sustainable way. And Arsenal are in this place now where it's a bit of a crossroads, because either KSE say, we really want to be back at the top of English football and we want to be sitting at European football's top table. And so we are going to invest from our own pockets to make that happen. Or they're just going to keep plodding along the way they are and hope that they appoint the right coach and hope that they get a group of young players coming through like the ones we have now, the Saka, Smith-Rowes, Martinellis, etc., and that their development is going to see us move forward. But that's not good enough for us Arsenal fans. It isn't good enough. We want more, and rightly so. But what I would say is, how can you compete with that unless you build for the long term? I talk about doing things the right way, and Arsenal have to do things the right way if they're ever going to close that gap. Because for as long as KSE are in charge, Stan Kroenke is never going to say, here's a 250, 260 million pound war chest for the summer. Go and get the players you want. So whether you've got Carlo Ancelotti in charge, whether you've got Jose Mourinho in charge, whether you've got Pep Guardiola in charge, you're going to have a lot of the same issues at Arsenal Football Club. Has Mikel Arteta made mistakes? Yeah, he has. Of course he has. And there's no getting away from that. Could a more experienced, seasoned manager have done a better job with the current players that we have? Probably. But you look at some of the big successes right now in terms of managers. You look at Pep Guardiola. Pep Guardiola spends a fortune, an absolute fortune, and he always has done everywhere he's ever been. Money talks because it brings you the best players. And when you have the best players, it is obviously easier to win football matches. I think for me, I don't expect Arsenal to challenge for the Premier League title now, because I appreciate and understand that under this current ownership, we're not going to compete financially with City, who've just, as I said, gone out and signed Jack Grealish to add to their already embarrassment of riches. With Manchester United, who have added Jadon Sancho and Rafa Varane this summer. With Chelsea, who, despite spending an absolute fortune last summer to bring in Timo Werner and Kai Havertz, are now going to spend 95 million on another striker. We can't keep up with that. So then it becomes a free-for-all for the fourth place. And the fourth place is between Liverpool, who over the last couple of seasons, over the last 3 seasons, have had a generational team, the type of team that we've not seen at Liverpool for many years. They were that good. Tottenham, Arsenal, Leicester are in the conversation now as well. And so for Arsenal to miss out on a Champions League spot, which really there's only one available when you consider that those other 3 clubs financially are so much stronger than everybody else, it's not acceptable, but it's not unthinkable. And this is where we're at. And this is why I constantly say to fans, adjust your expectation, not because you are accepting mediocrity, but because we are owned by a group who are not going to change their way. And there is a ceiling with regards to what Arsenal can achieve operating this way. So adjust your expectations, as I say, not because you are happy with Arsenal being 8th, not because you don't want Arsenal to win anything, not because of any other reason other than that is being realistic. And this is where we are now. I think poor management of the football club has seen us really suffer. You know, poor management in terms of the managerial appointments that we've made post Arsene Wenger, the fact that Arsene Wenger stayed too long, the fact that, we've not got a structure in place, I don't think, behind the scenes that is robust enough, experienced enough, and organized enough, and pulling all in the same direction that leads to us progressing in terms of our recruitment and all the other stuff. So what happens is you get to this place where unless you're going to spend big money, you cannot afford to make mistakes behind the scenes. You cannot make mistakes that big clubs, no, wrong word. You cannot make mistakes that the big spending clubs can afford to make because you don't have that room for margin. You can't do a Pep Guardiola and buy a goalkeeper in your first season for big money and decide 3 months, 4 months in that you don't actually think he's good enough and then go and do it again the following summer. You can't spend in excess of £100 million on fullbacks just because you're not happy with the first 2 that you bought in. This is the point. So you can't afford to make the mistakes because the investment is not there to rectify those mistakes when they happen and to rectify them quickly. And you end up in situations where mistakes like the signing of Shkodran Mustafi, the giving of a new contract to Mesut Ozil, which in hindsight proved to be a mistake, the contracts that we've given to Sead Kolasinac, etc., etc. All of those mistakes are things that we are still paying for because we don't have the level of investment that City, Chelsea, and United do to be able to write that off, push it to the side, and go again. That's one of the big issues for Arsenal here. And people will say, oh, I'm defending the football club and I'm trying to be positive and I'm trying to be this. And a couple of you saying that I'm after a particular job and that's why I'm talking like this. No, it's nothing to do with that. I'm being completely honest and I'm trying to be logical about what we're seeing unfold at Arsenal at the moment. Arsenal have made a mess of this summer transfer window, and I'll explain to you why in just a second. But at the end of the day, if you think that Arsenal without investment are going to compete with Chelsea, United and City, you are living in cuckoo land. I don't care what Arsenal did 20 years ago. I don't care what Arsenal did under Wenger. I don't care what Arsenal did under George Graham. The game has changed. The game has moved on. Money talks. It's no coincidence that Chelsea and Manchester City, 2 clubs that were on their knees financially when I was growing up, 2 clubs that were largely insignificant during the days I was growing up, have become powerhouses in world football. Why? Because somebody came along and somebody put their money where their mouth is. And the Cronkies might be as rich as some of the other owners that do throw money about, but they're not going to do it. So while they're here, we've got a problem. We've got a serious problem. And that's why the expectations need to be adjusted. Not because we're happy to adjust them, but because how can you chase out a manager of a football club who literally has no chance of succeeding? How can you chase out players who literally have no chance of succeeding? This is where all the blame and all the focus and all the anger right now is being pointed in the wrong direction. There's people livid at Granit Xhaka because he's going to sign a new contract. Why? There's people livid at Hector Bellerin because the club can't shift him. Why? There's people livid at Mikel Arteta because he can't go out and get the players he needs now to take this team forward. This is, for me, where Arsenal fans are becoming a bit of a laughing stock because we can't unite about the thing that actually is the problem at our football club, and that is the Cronkies. It's the mismanagement of Arsenal Football Club. For me, it's not even about the money. The money plays a part, and the money would cover up and rectify a lot of the issues that we have at the club, just like they do elsewhere. But it's the mismanagement constantly over a period of time that has led us to this place, because we did commit to spending £72 million to bring in Nicola Pepe. We did commit to spending £27 million on William Saliba, who isn't even playing for the club, hasn't even played a competitive fixture for the club. We did commit to spending £35 million on Shkodran Mustafi, almost £40 million on Granit Xhaka, 50 on Lacazette, 60 on Aubameyang. So if you're going to sit there and say that Arsenal have spent no money, that's not true. The fact that Arsenal are a massive football club and a huge brand has allowed Arsenal to spend money in the transfer market, but the money's been spent badly. And now we're in a place where we need a bailout, and a bailout in the shape of somebody at the top, and not the owner, obviously, going, you know what? We've made so many mistakes in the past. We've got an overloaded squad of overpaid players that nobody wants to take off of our hands. We can't bring people in as a result of that. So we need to do something to bail the club out, write that off, and start again, start fresh. And I do think actually the way they've gone about this transfer window in terms of the players they've signed so far is the right way to go about it. Longer term investments with a view to developing those players, because that's the only way, if the Cronkies are not going to, and we know they're not going to, spend big bucks to elevate this team up to the level it needs to be immediately. It's just impossible to compete with some of these football clubs without that level of investment. And so how are you expecting us to do that? You look at Paris Saint-Germain now, and, you know, it hurts me actually that Lionel Messi, who I regard as one of the greatest footballers of all time, has joined them. I mean, why? You've gone to join one of the, in my opinion, weakest, not the weakest, that's harsh, but it's not a strong league. It's not a league I would particularly be excited about playing in if I was a player of Messi's level. But why is Messi there? Why is Neymar there? Why is Gianluigi Donnarumma gone there? Why is Sergio Ramos gone there? They've all gone there for the money, which proves the point that PSG, Man City, Chelsea, to a lesser degree Manchester United, because they're a massive football club and a lot of that revenue is self-generated. But you can't compete with those football clubs. So stop expecting Arsenal to do that, because you're just ultimately going to be disappointed. What I want to see Arsenal do is have a plan, is see Arsenal do things in the right way and move forward that way. And unfortunately for us to do that, until we can clear out some of the old mistakes, until we can rectify them over a period of time, which is the only way we can do it, because as I keep saying, KSE are not going to spend the money to do it, then you know, you have to be a little bit more patient. How do you rebuild a side when you can't move players out? How do you bring in another right back, for example, when you've got 4 in your books, none of which you're convinced about? How do you bring in another striker when you've got 4 striking options that you're maybe not convinced about, or that you don't maybe think fit in this current system? There are problems at Arsenal Football Club that are much deeper than Mikel Arteta, than Edu. There is problems hanging over at this football club that have been there for the last 10 years and or have been brewing in the background and now have come to the forefront. Spending irresponsibly on average players to the point now where they're on massive contracts and no one else wants to take them off your hands has been one of the biggest issues. And it's why Arsenal can't move players on this time around. Now, I talked about how I think Arsenal have got this transfer window wrong and how they've gone into it wrong. And I talked about in the title, poor planning, and why that poor planning might see us end up falling further behind the so-called big spenders. And I'm going to come on to touch on that in a second. But I just want to remind you guys very, very quickly that this podcast is brought to you by manscaped.com. So for all your male grooming needs, head over to the Manscaped website, enter our promo code, which is 90min20, and you shall receive 20% off as well as free shipping on your order. You won't be disappointed. Some great products, and you stand to save yourself a lot of money. Why have Arsenal approached this transfer window wrong? Why have Arsenal plan this poorly, in my opinion? And the answer is quite simple. It's obvious. It's clear as day that the reason Arsenal are not moving forward in their pursuit of a number of targets right now is due to a lack of finance. It's due to their inability to move out some of the players that they hope to move out. If Arsenal Football Club went into this summer thinking that they were going to get some of the fees that we've heard quoted: 20 million for Bellerin, 30 million for Xhaka, 20 million for Guendouzi, 30 million for Willock, 20 million for Nketiah. You're living in cloud cuckoo land, because that was never going to happen. We did a podcast about this at the start of the transfer window, where we quoted what we thought that each of those players would earn. And I've mentioned it many times before, but there were many of you who said that I was being overly harsh on some of those figures, that I was being negative and pessimistic about our chances of selling these players on for worthwhile amounts of money. And I've been proven right so far, because Roma didn't even want to pay £15 million for Granit Xhaka. Nobody wants to pay the £20 million we're asking for Hector Bellerin. In fact, nobody wants to pay anything at all. The only offers that have come across the table for Hector Bellerin have been loan offers. Nobody wants to pay for our shit. Nobody wants to pay for our dead wood. So how do you move them on? Well, the problem is, if you've tied them down on stupid contracts, you can't. And you're stuck. And without European football, and we're going into another season without being in the Champions League, our financial situation all the time is getting harder and harder. It's declining. Yeah, there's been some bits in the background to restructure debt and that sort of thing. But Arsenal were massively banking on bringing in money from player sales this summer, and that money has not come. Therefore, Arsenal cannot proceed in doing what it is they want to do in the transfer market. To plan your transfer window around selling a group of players that have no market value is ludicrous. It's crazy, and it's poor planning. And we're paying for that now. Am I ruling out Arsenal doing something in the next couple of weeks whereby they find a way of raising funds from elsewhere to get a deal done? No, I'm not, because I think they're in a place now where they have to do something. And is that going to lead to the Kroenkes investing in some way, shape or form? I'd like to think so, but I wouldn't bank on it. So the point here is that Arsenal have gone into this window expecting to sell, and therefore planned their spending around that. We've spent £50 million on Ben White, who I think is a good centre-back. And I talked earlier on about how we had to pay the over the odds to get Ben White in the door. A lot of the time you have to do that. You want the best players, you've got to pay over the odds. That's how football works. You got to persuade people to sell their biggest assets. And the only way you do that is by making appealing offers. So we spent £50 million on a centre-back. We've spent 20 odd million pounds on a central midfielder who I do believe is going to go on and really be a good player. And yes, that is doing things the right way, in my opinion, investing in players that will be the future of your football club. And we've signed Nuno Tavares, cover at left back for Kieran Tierney. But we still need another central midfielder. We still need a creative midfielder, and we still need another goalkeeper. And at the moment, none of that is moving forward. And that is not moving forward, in my opinion. I don't know this, but I'm just reading between the lines, because Arsenal planned and assumed, perhaps naively and stupidly, that they were going to bring in money for sales, and that they will bring in some money from sales, but it won't be anywhere near what they hoped at the start of the window. And unless KSE are going to say, we need to intervene here, this is going to go on and on and on until we get all of those players out. And the only way we're going to get them out is when their contracts run down and we can start again. But how far are we going to fall in the process of waiting for that to happen? How far are we going to fall while we're waiting for our problems to be gone? It's a big issue for me, and it's a big problem, and it's a big concern. I think that Arsenal, even if you don't think Mikel Arteta is the right man, are doing it the right way in terms of the players that they're targeting, in terms of the players that they've gone after and brought in so far. But you also have to be realistic and say that a young Belgian midfielder, a Portuguese left back who's still pretty much a rookie, didn't play all that much first team football for Benfica, and a relatively inexperienced centre-half in Ben White at Premier League level anyway, you've got to wonder and question whether that's going to be enough to elevate Arsenal into the position they need to be. The only hope I've got going into the new season is that we are going to see more from Saka. We are going to see more from Smith Rowe, from Martinelli. That some of those younger players, the players that Arsenal are building around, are going to step up to the plate, are going to continue to develop, that Thomas Partey is going to get fit again and stay fit, that Kieran Tierney is going to stay fit. Those are the positives and the things I'm taking some encouragement from going into the new season. But as for the overall picture, unless that investment comes in, you cannot expect Arsenal realistically to compete with the clubs I've mentioned. We're always going to be in their shadow. We're always going to be behind them. And with three of them running away from everybody else in terms of what they're able to spend, there's always going to be a chance that we do miss out on the top four, because there are other clubs in a similar boat to us competing for that position. And there are 3 or 4 of those clubs making it very, very difficult for you to actually get over the line and take that position. So Arsenal dropping out the top 4, whilst it's not acceptable and I'm not happy with it, it's not unthinkable. It isn't crazy. It isn't such a mega underachievement that you can sit there and say, you know, this is a disgrace. You need to sack Mikel Arteta. It's the way things are now. And it's a consequence of Arsenal falling behind, because where Manchester City got taken over by ambitious ownership and Chelsea got taken over by ambitious ownership, Arsenal went the other way. Arsenal got an owner that saw the club as nothing more than a business, that wants to apply a self-sustaining model, when in reality, that's not how you win things in football anymore. So either accept that, get behind your club, support the club, and focus your anger and frustration towards the actual problem, which is the way the club is being managed from the very top. That's what you got to do. Either do that and channel that in the right way, or don't bother at all, because nothing that you can sort of throw at Mikel Arteta is even relevant in the bigger scheme of things, in the bigger picture. You can talk about, last season there was Arsenal fans saying, why isn't he playing Gabriel Martinelli more? Why is he playing this system? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? When actually the problem was much deeper than Mikel Arteta all along. And if you sack Mikel Arteta, the man who's been entrusted with overseeing this project and this rebuild, the man who's identified Ben White as a £50 million investment, or someone worthwhile spending that kind of money on, someone who's brought in Albert Sambi Lokonga, someone who's managed to get Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe to commit their futures to the club, someone who's got Kieran Tierney to commit his future to the club. If you sack him now, you start again. The project begins all over again, and we fall behind again. Because there are some positives right now. There are some things that you look at Arsenal are doing and you think, yeah, this is the right direction. I would be, if I were in charge of the football club, taking this same approach. The same approach of identifying young, investable talent that will go on and develop even more. And that is Arsenal's best chance, by bringing through this group all at once, by building this team from this stage and then watching them develop together as a unit. That's Arsenal's best chance of closing the gap on the top 4. Because if we're just going to try and throw money at every transfer window, then we're just going to lose every time, because we can't throw the kind of money that Chelsea do, that City do, that Man United do. So it has to be this way. It has to be Arsenal building, and with a build comes pain and frustration and disappointment. But if we all acknowledge that the build needs to happen, then what are we expecting? Because we can't have it both ways. Something's got to give. And I know a lot of people are disagreeing with me in the comments, and that is absolutely fine. But this is my view on why Arsenal's poor planning over a number of seasons, and poor planning going into this window where we thought we were going to get tons of money in for deadwood players, has caused us to fall behind in the past, and will continue to do so unless we either change approach, which it looks like we're starting to do, or we invest big money, which isn't going to happen. So I've kind of given you a double-edged sword there. But yeah, let's go over to the comments, because I know there are a lot of people that disagree. There are a lot of people that have different views, and that's absolutely fine. But those are my views on where Arsenal are at the moment, why Of course, I'm not happy with Arsenal's current position. I'm not happy with being eighth. I'm not happy with the struggles that we're currently going through. But I also recognize that this rebuild needs to happen. And that rebuild, and Mikel Arteta and the club and Edu are being handicapped. They essentially have a hand tied behind their back because they might identify players that they want to bring in, but they can't do that until they move some of the current ones out. And because of the shit contracts that people have given them in the past, because of the ridiculous wage packets that they've been handed by incompetent sort of directors in the past, we're stuck. You know, it's like trying to pull away from, pull away from the shore with a boat, but your anchor's on. There's only so far you're going to go before you get stuck. And unless someone comes along and either says, here is X amount of money, pay off all these idiots, get rid of them, and now here's X amount of money to go and replace those players immediately. And I'm talking about replacing them with ready-made players that are going to elevate our level straight away. Then that is not going to happen quickly, and it's not going to happen overnight. And that is what my point is. Maybe Mikel isn't the right man for the next 3-4 seasons. But who else is going to come and put up with this job right now? You know, people sitting in the chat telling me, go get Conte. Antonio Conte wouldn't touch this club with a barge pole right now because he would recognize and understand. And just from conversations with the ownership, I'm sure he'd get a feel of how this club is being run and how this club is essentially an environment in which no manager can thrive at the moment. It's going to take time. Arsenal, you know, despite the lack of transfer activity this summer, could be better. Let's not rule that out because there were improvement signs towards the back end of last season. Some of those younger players that we were quite heavily reliant on have had another season under their belt and will hopefully get even better. So there are some reasons to be optimistic. It's not all doom and gloom, but equally, don't be deluded. Don't think that Arsenal can compete with City, Chelsea, United. Don't think that Arsenal in this development stage can compete with Liverpool, who, they've got their golden generation at the moment. Yeah, maybe you could argue it's on the decline a little bit, but it's still a great team with a great manager. Don't be deluded in thinking that Arsenal can hit that level and achieve those things without A, giving the manager time, just like Liverpool gave to Klopp, or B, significant investment. And when I say investment, I mean above and beyond what the club generates itself in terms of revenue. People will argue about FFP, financial fair play. How are we going to get around that? Well, I'm not a lawyer, but Manchester City and Chelsea seem to get around that fine. So I'm sure Arsenal could do it too. Right, let's get some of your comments in the chat box. I'd love to hear what you guys are saying. Harsh Bade says, Harry chats so much waffle. Sometimes it's laughable. Thank you very much, mate. Paul Murphy says, we know that we're not going to compete financially with Chelsea and City. So for me, Arteta and Edu are doing what has to be done by investing in youth. We already have Emil Smith-Rowe, Saka, Martinelli and Balogun. Yeah, and I agree. This is the right approach. It's the only way that we're ever going to close that gap. But it's a long game, and it isn't going to see us close that gap immediately. Could another manager do it a bit quicker? Maybe. I'm not denying that. But what I'm saying is that this is a long game, whatever way you look at it, because we are putting our faith in youth. Gianfranco says people that would sack him are just like the ones that sacked Poch at Spurs and put Mourinho in that nosedived the club. Short-term thinking never works. Nishith says you can't give Arteta the job and not invest enough to hide his inexperience. A shit team with inexperienced managers would be overall shit as well. Yeah, it's a good point. Good point. Alex says, I just don't like the fact that Arteta comes out several times as saying he's been backed when he clearly hasn't. Yeah, that is a massive bugbear of mine with Mikel Arteta. I don't think he needs to go so big on praising the Cronkies. I'm not saying that I want him to come out and slag off his bosses, because how many of you would do that? Nobody will come and do that. Slag off their boss in the public domain. I'm not saying he should do that, but I don't think he should go so big on the whole, the Cronkies are backing me, the owners know what we're trying to do. Or is it that Mikel is sensible enough to understand that this is the operating model at Arsenal Football Club? This is the way it is. There's nothing he can do about it, so he's got to work under those constraints. And is that something he was aware of when he took the job? Therefore, he cannot complain about it now. Maybe. Maybe. And remember, like, look, I'm just going to bring up Transfermarkt, the website, because what I want to do is I want to give people an understanding as to what I'm talking about when I do chat about, like, how we're unable to compete with Chelsea, how we're unable to compete with Manchester City. Let's take the Chelsea example first, right? Because Chelsea are a club who, ever since Roman Abramovich has come in, have spent big money all the time. They've never shied away from it. They've never hidden that. And as a result, they've won 6 Premier League titles. They've won 2 Champions Leagues. They've picked up a number of FA Cups. They've picked up 2 UEFA Cups during his ownership of the club as well. And you just look at this now, okay? And if I just filter this to, let's do the 2020-21 season, and I'll just share my screen with those of you watching us live on YouTube. Don't worry if you're listening via the audio, I will explain this to you as well. But we're looking at Chelsea, and you can see the trophies on the screen there. As I've mentioned, squad value £806 million. And you look at arrivals last summer, right? Frank Lampard went through a transfer ban, and off the back of that, Chelsea went and brought in Thiago Silva on a free transfer. But Thiago Silva, of course, a very experienced campaigner, top player, and someone that, we talk a lot about transfer fees, but actually what costs a lot of the time is not just the transfer fee, but it's the wages. It's what you need to commit to paying them. It's why the Man United deal for Rafael Varane is so much bigger than the Ben White one, because yes, okay, on the face value, Rafael Varane is cheaper, but he's not cheaper, is he? Because you're spending an absolute fortune in wages and all the other stuff. And then look, have a problem scoring goals, have a problem in the forward positions. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go and get Hakim Ziyech, £36 million. Timo Werner, £47.7 million. Kai Havertz, £72 million. And 12 months later, they're going to go and spend another £95 million on Romelu Lukaku. How the hell do you compete with that? And it's not like they're selling for big money. They're not. Who did they sell? They sold Alvaro Morata, £31 million to Atletico Madrid. So that's a small percentage of what they went out and spent. Pasalic, 13 million. Nathan, 2.7 million. Everybody else with loans and free transfers. So that's my point. When you got clubs that can do that, you can't keep up with it. It's really difficult. It's really frustrating. And there comes a point where you have to accept that that's the way football has gone right now. And therefore, expecting us to still be on a level playing field with some of these football clubs, for me, is unrealistic, and it's mad. And it's that overinflated expectation that leads to you being angry and disappointed ultimately. Let's go over to the chat box and take some of your questions, comments, and super chats. Big thank you to Said Abdullah, who says, Harry, I can't see a style of football with Arteta, and I've been a big supporter of him. We need to see progress. We absolutely do need to see progress. We did see some progress at the back end of last season, but unfortunately, that progress was not enough. And I've said time and time again that from the start of this season, I will be on Mikel Arteta. I will be scrutinizing his every decision, his every selection, his every tactic. Just because I sit here and I say that I think the problems are deeper, and I talk about the wider issues at Arsenal and why we've come to this point and how it's now unrealistic to expect that in one transfer window we can turn that all around, doesn't mean that I'm giving Mikel Arteta a free pass. It just means that I think his management has been an issue up until now, but it's not the biggest issue for me. The biggest issue is you bring in a manager, you ask him to rebuild the squad, but he can't rebuild because he's stuck with crap hanging over from the previous regimes. That's the big problem that we've got here at Arsenal. There's a couple more super chats I want to just touch on before they disappear, because they do disappear quite quickly. I want to say thank you to Tariq Talks for his very kind donation. Make sure you check out his YouTube channel as well. You can click on his name in the comments and it should take you straight over there. Brand new channel, great content. He's been a big time supporter of the Chronicles of Gooner. So I want to show him that support back by telling you guys and asking you guys, obviously, to head over there and check it out. He says, this video has been top quality so far and the reality check needed for the fan base. Do you think there is a pathway with the current ownership to compete? If so, what would it look like? I think the only way to compete right now or in a couple of years' time is to build the way we're building. And that is around bringing in young players, developing them, and having the right coach in place to nurture them and take them up to that next level. Whether that's Mikel Arteta remains to be seen. But the example of Liverpool is a great one, because FSG are not very well thought of by by a lot of Liverpool fans. FSG have been praised in the aftermath of Jurgen Klopp's achievements, but actually people were frustrated with them previous to that. People, didn't really warm to them. And what I would say with them is they're another example of an ownership that hasn't really invested enough of their own money, has been quite smart, though, in the way that they've sold and bought, in the way that they've appointed the right manager to oversee that and the right people within the club to do the smart business. They've reaped the rewards for it. But as I've said to you before, that is not a sustainable way of doing it, because you might be able to keep it up for 3 or 4 seasons, which Liverpool have to their credit. But now that Manchester City and Chelsea are spending big again, and Manchester United have spent big again, are Liverpool going to be able to keep up in terms of what they spend this summer? I would say no. I'm sure they're going to spend less than any of those clubs. And they fell away last season because a few injuries rocked them, and they didn't have the money that Manchester City or Chelsea do to rectify that straight away. They couldn't go out and buy a top world-class centre-back to replace Virgil van Dijk, not because they didn't want to, because they didn't have the money, because FSG operate in a certain way, just like the Kroenkes do. And you saw Liverpool suffer as a consequence of that. And I guarantee you, before this Premier League season kicks off, that Liverpool will not be title contenders in 2021-22. Why? Because they're not going to make the level of investment required to keep up with those big spenders. And with their team, in my opinion, on its way down, you're going to see them naturally drop off. And you'll look back in 10 years' time and you'll look at Liverpool and the great spell they had. They finished a point behind City the first season, and then they went on and won their first title in 30 years. And that was a remarkable achievement. Picked up a Champions League crown along the way as well, under Jurgen Klopp's stewardship. And you look back in history and you'll say that's great. But when you look back at Chelsea and City's history, you're going to see trophy after trophy after trophy, year after year after year, because their ownership are willing to sustain this current operating model. They're willing to continuously throw this money because it's like they've got bottomless pockets. You're talking about state-run football clubs and clubs run by Russian oligarchs. So it is great the way Liverpool did it, and they deserve an immense amount of credit, probably more so than many other clubs who have achieved it in recent years, because of the way they did it, because they didn't have a sugar daddy financing it. But can they sustain that? I would say they can't. And that's the way football's going right now. I want to say a big thank you to Harsh, who signed up as a member. Thank you so much, mate. Really, really appreciate your support. Matt G says that, Harry, why do you read out the abuse comments? I don't mean the criticism as healthy debate is good, but why read out a comment saying Harry waffles? I got to be honest, I didn't mean to click on that one. But once I did, I thought I'd read it out anyway. You're right. It doesn't add anything to the discussion. Just Being says other people's views are valid, of course, but I think you're on point with your analysis. It makes the most sense to me in a sea of delusion. What else have we got here? Don't forget, by the way, if you have just signed up to become a member of the channel, you can click on the community tab and you can join the Discord server. There is a link in there. Make sure you join that Discord server. I'll drop another refreshed link in there just in case you have trouble accessing it after we get through this show. Kevin Campbell, former Arsenal man, says time is our kryptonite, yet we must build properly. Arsenal fans don't want to admit how far we've gone behind the others. It's sad yet true. Completely agree. Spot on analysis there. What else have we got? Rodrigo Bukaka says Harry Arteta is doing the owner's bidding, as had done Arsene in the past. Yeah, and look, it's frustrating, but I mean, what do you want them to do? I mean, Arsenal is still a massive football club. Arsenal is still a huge entity. Arsenal is still a football club that so many people in the world would want to manage, but the very elite would see it as a bit of a step down and a bit of a poison chalice at this moment in time. Arsene Wenger protected the club because he was a man of integrity, and Arsene Wenger took all the brunt and the responsibility of it all himself, and that was in many ways his downfall. But equally, Arsene Wenger is too loyal a character, too good a man to start throwing shit at people, to start airing people's dirty laundry. I think that was abundantly clear when he released that book, where many hoped that he would maybe open people's eyes to a few things, and he chose not to, because that's not Arsene Wenger. Arteta strikes me as that same kind of guy, that if he's with you, he's with you. If he's loyal to you, he's loyal to you. I don't think that can be said of the way he's treated some of his players, but we're talking about people above him now. We're talking about his hierarchy, the people that employ him. I don't expect him to turn on them, nor would I expect any manager or anybody in any working environment to turn on their boss publicly. I'd like to think that he's challenging them behind the scenes, and I'd like to think that if this continues over a longer period of time and that investment is still not coming, and people are still getting on Arteta's back about the fact that Arsenal are not competing, that he might walk away. I would have a lot more respect for him if he did that at some point and said, yeah, this is not working for me because we are falling further behind. The investment is not there. It is simply impossible for me to compete with the size that you're expecting me to compete with. And I think that day will probably come, because I think Arteta places enough value in his own kind of ability, and places enough belief in himself that he'll feel he can go on and get another job and he can bounce back from it, and that he doesn't feel that his efforts at a football club like Arsenal will be being rewarded if this continues over a period of time. Now, he's got to earn that right first, because based on what we've seen from Mikel Arteta so far, I don't think he is in a position to go make demands. He's not in a position to go knock on Mr. Kroenke's door, virtual door, via Zoom, however they do it, and say, I want this, I want that. Because he's not delivered enough on the pitch. He's not shown enough progress on the pitch to justify that. But equally, it's very difficult to show that progress when you're not being backed. And he might say he's being backed because he's got to say that, because he's the manager of the football club and they're his employers. But we as fans have got to read between the lines. We as fans have got to make our own assessment of whether or not Mikel Arteta is being backed. And I think in most cases, we'll say that he's not. And the fact that he's not means that we can't put all of the blame on him, which is all I'm saying. Let's take out, let's pick up a couple more of your comments. Sorry. Before I do that, it's just a quick reminder for you guys, if you haven't done so already, to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new. It really, really does help. We are approaching 15K and I'd love to get there sharpish. We're not that far away. I think we're about 35 subscribers away. Maybe we can get there overnight. Who knows? So if you haven't done so, please do subscribe. I know there are a lot of you that watch these videos that aren't subscribed. If not, what are you waiting for? You can see there's currently over 36 of you watching live on YouTube right now. 112 likes on the board. Let's try and get that up to 150 between now and the end of the show. That should be achievable. Let's take some more of your comments. Gianfranco says he does say it. He's out here saying we work with what we have. Does he sound happy? Yeah, look, that was a comment that he made recently, Mikel Arteta. And I guess it's the first crack we're seeing, isn't it, in Mikel Arteta's demeanor about everything. It feels to me like he's trying to put a message across that we can only work with what we have, and what we don't have, we can't really get caught up on, which suggests that we can't go and get what it is that he wants and what we all think the team needs. So, yeah, interesting observation, Gianfranco. And it's something that I'll be keeping a close eye on. We'll be keeping a close eye on Mikel Arteta's responses and comments over the coming weeks. JG10 says, I just feel a bit down about Arsenal this season. I just want to see the old Arsenal back, but I'm finding it hard to find optimism. Yeah, absolutely. Deepak Patel says, do you not think the points you made today all apply to Unai Emery too? To a degree they do. But for me, Unai Emery never had, how do I put this? A lot of the points do appeal apply, whatever you want to say, to Unai Emery. But my issue with Unai Emery was that ruthlessness wasn't there. There was an indecisiveness, and all of that stuff never convinced me that he was the man to weed out all the crap from the club. In fact, I think a lot of crap was brought to the club under his watch. The fact that he was never given the control over transfers as well, he had an input, but not enough of an input, was a telltale sign that Arsenal had put this guy in as a stopgap. They'd put him in as someone to fill a hole. They only gave him a 2-year contract, and they didn't give him any say in transfers. So what did we end up with? We ended up with a manager who had a bunch of players he didn't want to work with. The fans were not impressed by. We had a manager who let the players select their captain via a secret ballot. And all of those things just showed to me that Unai Emery was not decisive enough. For all the things you can slag Mikel Arteta off about, and there are a lot, one of them you can't say is that he's not ruthless. You know, he is ruthless when he feels he needs to be. You've seen it with Saliba, you've seen it with Guendouzi. And while I might not agree with all of those decisions, it does give me confidence in the fact that when those tough decisions need to be made, we've got someone there who will make them. Sometimes he'll make mistakes along the way. We've all talked about how inexperienced he is. But for somebody as experienced as Unai Emery was when he came in, I don't think we saw anywhere near enough of that. And I think that Unai Emery built on something that Arsene Wenger left. By the time Mikel Arteta came, I actually think we were in a worse state than we were when Arsene Wenger left. And so, yes, Unai Emery did quite well in finishing 5th and going to the Europa League final, but it was never sustainable. The way he was doing it wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't showing a clear path for the future. I think Mikel is looking to the future, and I think he is trying to take us in that direction. Whether he'll get the time to do it or whether he'll succeed in doing it is a completely different matter. Feradoon says, Harry, Leicester don't have the sugar daddy, but they're doing a better job with smart buying and a better manager. Yeah, I think with Leicester, there is a bit of that element where they've got an owner that's willing to throw money in. They have invested a lot of money in Leicester City Football Club. And actually, there was a graphic going around on Twitter. I wish I'd saved it to show you guys, where it highlighted how much of their own money the Premier League club owners have currently put in. And Leicester were quite high up that table, a lot higher up the table than Arsenal. Yes, they've sold well, they've sold cleverly, they've bought well as well, and they've got a good coach in place. But there has been money put in there. And why they have the success, why they have the right manager in place, why they do buy wisely and they do sell wisely, is because they have owners at the football club that care about the football side more than the business side of things. And Arsenal don't have that. Arsenal have an owner who's got his fingers in about 57 different pies and just sees this club as a cash cow and nothing more. Let's continue through the comments. Let's say a big hello to Innie and thank Innie for his very, very kind super chat donation. He says, joining late, Harry, but I think this summer window has shed a light on the gross inadequacies in our backroom management team. Changes are needed. Any top manager would struggle with this backroom leadership. Yeah, agreed. I don't think we have enough sort of leadership behind the scenes, and I don't think we have enough structure. And what you need is a structure in which people are all pulling in the same direction. And what Arsenal have essentially done is brought Edu in and said, well, we're not really sure if you know what you're doing by yourself. So how about you team up with Mikel Arteta, who's got 1,000,001 other things on his plate as well, and we'll just let you guys deal with it. I mean, what does Vinay know about football? With all due respect, Richard Garlick's coming. Is that going to help? Time will tell. But it does feel like those two guys, Arteta and Edu, have been thrown out to sea, thrown one sort of rubber ring and told, go on, stay afloat, keep this club afloat. And that's a consequence of poor management from the top down. It really is. Big hello to Wandering Minstrel, who says the owners should make it clear to the fans what the vision is now. Yeah, I think they should as well. And I think some fans would buy into that a little bit more, or buy into the plan and the idea and the project if they knew what it was the club were looking to achieve, if there were some markers on that, some objectives upon which you can measure yourself. But they're not going to come out and say that, because it would show it, they will never say anything other than we are looking to compete for the best trophies and right at the very top. But actually, to get there, we're going to have to go through this process, and we're going to have to go through some pain, unless they have a change of heart, change of operating model, change of structure and decide that we're going to throw some bloody money at the problem, which I'm not saying is the be all and end all, right? Because there are big clubs in the world who have spent lots and lots of millions of pounds on bad signings over the years. But it's like, I talked about it before. The difference between like Liverpool and Chelsea was Chelsea need a striker this summer, despite having bought 2 big money strikers or forwards last summer. And they've gone, here you go, Thomas, £95 million. There you go, my friend. Go get yourself Romelu Lukaku, one of the hottest properties in European football. Doesn't matter if we had him in the past. Doesn't matter if we sold him in the past. Who cares about that? Water under the bridge. Here's the money. Go and get him. And then you look at Liverpool, who are kind of in the same boat as us in the sense of they can't spend what those other clubs can spend, who lost their biggest centre-half last season and couldn't go and replace him. And as a consequence, saw their team drop off a cliff in terms of their performance level. And that's where us and Liverpool are in a different kind of ball game altogether to Chelsea, Liverpool, so to Chelsea, Manchester City and Manchester United. And Liverpool, you'll see, in my opinion, are going to drop off a little bit as a consequence of that now, because that cycle is coming to an end. And unless you're going to keep making that level of investment, which Liverpool aren't going to do, FSG certainly aren't going to do, then you're going to see those cycles end very quickly, whilst Chelsea and City continue to dominate because they have owners willing to continuously throw big money at the problem. So there we are. I think I'm going to leave it there. We've been going for over an hour. Look, I know a lot of you will disagree with a lot of the points I've made. I know a lot of you will feel differently, and that's absolutely fine. There's no issue with that. I do want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to thank you all for your kind super chat donations, for hitting the like button, for subscribing to the channel, for becoming members. We've had a couple of you join up during this live show. So I want to say thank you all for your continued support. And look, even if we disagree on certain subjects, the great thing is that we can have a good debate and a good discussion. And that's what this channel and podcast is all about. To summarize kind of where I'm at is, I do think that we are in a place where none of us want to be, that we need to move out from as quickly as possible. But the issue is that to get there, we're going to have to go around the houses. We're going to have to do it the long way. We're going to have to play the long game, and we're going to have to minimize the number of mistakes that we make in our recruitment. It's going to take 2-3 years of good recruitment to get Arsenal up to the top level. Chelsea can have a poor summer in terms of their recruitment and rectify it the following summer. Arsenal can't do that. So there is no room for error. There is no money to throw at mistakes, to put them right immediately. And that's why these things take longer. Arsenal have no divine right to be in the top 4 because of the changes to the football landscape that I've already discussed. And because of that, finishing outside of the top 4 is not unthinkable. It's actually a reality. And it means that finishing in the top 4 would be a massive achievement. And it's a massive achievement. And that's strange to think when you consider that a number of years ago, we all turned our noses up at Arsenal wanting to finish in the top 4. But Arsene Wenger, dare I say it, saw this coming, because Manchester City started to emerge during his time. Chelsea certainly emerged during his time. And he recognized that the footballing landscape was changing and that Arsenal were going to have to adapt in order to keep up with that. Arsenal's big revenue and Arsenal's kind of size as a club bears some advantage, but because things are so much more evenly spread out nowadays in terms of transfer money, in terms of TV money and what that means you can then go and do in the transfer market, the playing field has leveled. There are clubs in the bottom half of the Premier League, as I've already mentioned, who can go and spend big money on players. There are owners in the Premier League, the likes of Leicester, Aston Villa, who are willing to bankroll their football clubs to get them up a level. And with Arsenal having one of the most richest owners in the world, yet being insistent on operating under a self-sustaining model, it does make it frustrating, because that self-sustaining model is only going to take you so far in the modern game. It's the reality of where football as a sport is at. And we as fans need to understand that and I guess understand it and, take it into consideration when making our assessments, when making our judgments on where the football club are at. And we need to understand what the issues are at Arsenal and make sure that we do channel that anger, frustration, disappointment, in the right way, and it's directed at the right people. And it's got to be directed at the Cronkies, not for Arsenal not spending money, because Arsenal have spent money over the years, but for their poor management of the club. The mismanagement from the very top has led to Arsenal making countless mistakes in the transfer market, which we're now still paying for. So it's not about going out and spending 500, 600 million pounds over the course of a couple of seasons. It's about spending the revenue that Arsenal do generate as a football club in the right way. That's a consequence of mismanagement, not putting the right people in the right positions. And it's why so many of us want to see them move on. And we want to see people who, even if they're not as clued up on football as we'd like, who at least have the ability to identify the right candidates or put the right people in place to do that side of things and to take this club forward. Because right now we're not going forward. The idea is to rebuild from scratch. And I think that's the right idea. It's the only way that without the investment, Arsenal are ever going to close that gap. But that is a long game, and a long game requires patience. And unfortunately, in my opinion, too many of our fans don't have that patience and are waiting to jump on the manager and jump on certain individual players, when in actual fact, they're not the root cause of what Arsenal are going through right now. But anyway, we're going to leave it there. Thank you all so much. Don't forget, hit that like button if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. And we will catch up with you guys all very, very soon. Until next time, take care of yourselves and stay safe. All the best. Ciao.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast.
I'm Martin Tyler, and you're listening to Harry Symeou.